If you're planning to retire soon, one of the first and most important questions is simple. Where will your money actually stretch? Tons of people think the answer is obvious. Move to a warm beach or to a smaller town. But it's not that simple. You want a place that's affordable, sure, but you also want healthcare access, decent services, safety, and a community that makes you feel like you belong. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 5 Canadian cities that right now, in 2025, give a real chance for a comfortable retirement on a fixed income. Each one has different strengths, different trade-offs, and a personality you can picture. By the end, you'll have a much clearer idea of which kind of place might actually suit your retirement, and why these particular cities keep showing up in affordability and retiree lists across Canada. Let's start in Quebec with Trois-Rivières. This city quietly does a lot of things right for retirees. It's small enough to be calm and walkable, but big enough to have hospitals, groceries, and cultural life, theaters, festivals, a riverfront that gives the whole city a relaxed vibe. The real appeal, though, is the cost. Compared to Montreal or Toronto, everyday expenses and rent in Trois-Rivières are low, which means a pension or fixed income goes a lot further. If you like historic streets, local festivals, and a slower pace where you can actually afford a decent apartment near the center, Trois-Rivières gives you that without meaningful sacrifice. Healthcare access in Quebec can be very good compared to some provinces, and being in a mid-sized city means you won't be flying 2 hours to the nearest specialist for many common services. People who move there talk about a feeling of routine and calm. Coffee shops, local markets, river walks. That feels very retiree-friendly. For a sense of numbers, cost of living trackers show Trois-Rivières sits well below major metros on rent and daily expenses, which is why it keeps appearing on affordable living lists this year. Not far from Trois-Rivières is Sherbrooke, another Quebec city that's been on the radar for retirees. Sherbrooke has a slightly different personality. It's a university town with a steady cultural pulse, lots of parks, and a smart mix of urban amenities and outdoor access. The advantage here is that you get relatively low housing costs, but also the services a mid-sized city offers. Decent hospitals, good local transit, and community centers with programs for seniors. Sherbrooke feels safe and manageable. It's the kind of place where you can afford an apartment close to the action, walk to coffee shops, and still have money left over for occasional trips or hobbies. The cost numbers for Sherbrooke consistently put it among the friendlier cities for retirees in Canada. It's the blend of low rent and a community that still has culture and healthcare that makes it attractive. If you value language and local charm, and you don't mind French being the dominant language, Sherbrooke gives you comfortable living without the higher prices of Quebec's biggest cities. Heading out to Atlantic Canada, Fredericton in New Brunswick is another city you should know about. Fredericton has that small city riverside charm. A walkable downtown along the St. John River, community events, local markets, and enough culture to keep you entertained without the cost of a major metropolis. As a provincial capital, Fredericton punches above its weight on healthcare and public services, and that matters a lot for retirees who want secure access to clinics and hospitals without traveling. The property taxes and general cost of living are among the more attractive in Canada's Atlantic provinces, which means you can buy or rent a comfortable place and still have room left in your budget for groceries, utilities, and leisure. People who pick Fredericton often mention how friendly neighborhoods are and how the city strikes a balance between quiet living and essential services. If you'd like a slower pace, low cost, and a place where neighbors know one another, Fredericton tends to check those boxes. Move inland and you get to Regina, Saskatchewan. Regina surprises a lot of people when they first learn the numbers. This city manages to combine reasonable housing prices with full city services, and the provincial tax environment can be favorable for homeowners. Regina is a proper mid-sized city with hospitals, shopping centers, parks, and community programming, but the housing market here is quieter and more affordable than in coastal metros. If you're willing to accept prairie winters, Regina gives you a lot of space and a predictable cost structure. For retirees who want city amenities but don't need the density or price tag of a Toronto or Vancouver, Regina offers an attractive compromise: cheaper houses, lower monthly costs, and a stable local economy. Local cost breakdowns and retirement budget surveys list Regina as an affordable option in 2025, and some provincial financial policies are leaning toward protecting homeowners, which can help retirees living on fixed incomes. That kind of stability matters when you rely on pensions or savings. Finally, consider Brandon, Manitoba. Brandon is the kind of place that feels like a community at the right scale. Not tiny, not sprawling, and very manageable for retired life. Housing and rent tend to be modest. Food and utilities are affordable, and the city has basic medical services combined with a safe, quiet atmosphere. Because it's not a major migration magnet, Brandon tends to avoid the price spikes you see in larger markets, which is an advantage if your priority is stability and predictability in your finances. People in Brandon often point to outdoor access, local festivals, and a slower pace as major quality of life benefits. If you like gardening, proximity to parks, and living somewhere family-oriented with a steady rhythm, Brandon could be a fit. Cost trackers show Brandon holding down lower average prices compared to national averages, which is why it pops up on 2025 affordability lists. So what do these cities actually feel like when you live there day to day? And what are the trade-offs you'll want to consider? In Trois-Rivières and Sherbrooke, the vibe is very much European-style small city. More walking, more local cafes, and a cultural rhythm that suits people who want to step down the pace without losing access to hospitals and shops. Quebec's health system and community programming often mean better access for retirees than you might find in similarly sized towns in other provinces. Language is a consideration. While many people in these cities speak English, French is the dominant language in everyday life. So, if you don't want to learn even a little, it can feel off. The winters are real in Quebec, so if snow is a major concern, that's something to plan for. For Fredericton, the Atlantic feel is a big part of the charm. Waterfront paths, local markets, a tight community, and low property taxes. The trade-off can be that you may need to travel further for certain specialist medical care, and summers are short but beautiful. Regina and Brandon give you the prairies. Wide skies, community events, lots of green space, and lower property costs. The downside is winter weather and, depending on your needs, longer drives to see certain specialist care. Overall, each city has its identity. Trois-Rivières and Sherbrooke feel cultured and cozy. Fredericton feels gentle and neighborly. Regina feels stable and serviceable. And Brandon feels community-oriented and predictable. Those personalities matter when you're choosing a place to spend decades of retirement. Let's get practical. If you're actively planning a move, start with the numbers, but don't stop there. Look at average rents, property taxes, and typical utility costs, but also consider access to healthcare and proximity to family. That's the difference between a cheap place and a livable place. For example, a lower rent is meaningless if every specialist appointment requires a day trip and expensive travel. If you're leaning toward one of these cities, do a short trip first. Spend a week, talk to local real estate agents, check grocery prices, find a community center that looks like the kind of place you'd spend time. Those small, practical checks are the best way to make sure the city you pick truly fits your life and budget. A couple of other things to be aware of in 2025. First, housing markets and local costs can change. Inflation, migration patterns, and local policies all shift. Cities that look cheap now may slowly become more expensive if there's a sudden migration trend. Conversely, cities with soft markets may become even more affordable. Keep an eye on local price trends and on national indexes that track affordability. Income Tree's 2025 Affordability and Retirability Index is one example of a composite tool that mixes income, rent, home prices, and grocery costs to give you a broad sense of where places land on affordability. Use tools like that for a snapshot and then dig deeper locally. Second, think about weather and mobility. If getting around after age 70 is a concern, choose a city with good local transit or compact neighborhoods. If you love being outside in summer, Atlantic and Quebec cities often feel greener and more walkable than prairie cities. On the other hand, if you want quieter winters and less snow shoveling, Canada's milder coastal areas may be preferable, though they also tend to cost more. You might be wondering about taxes and healthcare specifically. These systems are provincial, so the details change depending on where you live. For retirees, that means looking closely at provincial drug coverage, property tax relief for seniors, and whether long-term care options are publicly supported or privately expensive. Atlantic provinces and Quebec sometimes offer programs that reduce costs for seniors, while prairie provinces may offer different tax incentives or lower property taxes in certain municipalities. Do your homework. Check provincial government websites for senior assistance programs, property tax credit options, and the kinds of home care services available locally. Those programs can make a real difference in a monthly budget. Let's also talk about the social side. Retirement is not only about money. It's about daily life, routine, and community. In Trois-Rivières, Sherbrooke, and Fredericton, you'll find active seniors groups, volunteer opportunities, and community classes that keep people socially connected. Regina and Brandon also have strong community programming, and because they're smaller, it's often easier to get to know neighbors and build a social circle. Consider what matters to you: proximity to arts, churches, community centers, volunteer organizations, or outdoor clubs. If you want to be involved, pick a place where the community structure supports that involvement. It makes day-to-day life richer and can stave off loneliness. If you're thinking about downsizing, housing options vary. In these cities, you'll find a mix of condos, small houses, and purpose-built retirement buildings. Sherbrooke and Fredericton have good condo options near downtowns that keep you close to services. Trois-Rivières has plenty of affordable apartments and smaller houses. Regina and Brandon will give you more house for your money if you prefer a small yard. Also consider maintenance and snow removal. If you don't want to deal with lawn or snow, condos and retirement communities often have services included, which is worth budgeting into your costs. I also want to be blunt about one common mistake people make when choosing a retirement city. They look only at price. That's a trap. The cheapest city can be cheap for a reason: lack of services, long drives to specialists, or limited social options. The goal should be affordability plus livability. That's why the 5 cities I mentioned keep showing up. They balance cost with services, community, and accessibility. They're not exotic beach towns. They're practical choices that let your pension fund a decent standard of living without constant worry. Finally, the bottom line. Trois-Rivières, Sherbrooke, Fredericton, Regina, and Brandon are all places in 2025 where a retiree can reasonably expect to stretch a pension further than in Canada's expensive coastal metros, while still keeping access to health, community, and services. They each have different personalities and trade-offs, but they share affordability and livability, and that combination is what matters most when you're planning for the long term. If you found this video useful, subscribe and stay tuned for our next uploads. Until next time on Maple Leaf Insider, take care and good luck planning your retirement.